Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of the Sounds Like Sustainability Conversations that I'm doing in behalf of the International Environmental Communication Association. It is a wonderful series of conversations and therefore deep dive into different contexts all across this wonderful world. And I'm very excited to have Beatriz with me today. And before we get to know you a bit better, and before we start talking about what is sustainability, what it isn't, what sounds like sustainability, and what doesn't, I would love to ask you if there's any sound, anything that you can hear at the moment that you would associate with sustainability. So anything that gives us an idea about where you are at the moment, and that leads us to the main topic of this conversation, which is sustainability and sustainability communication. So thanks for being here. Is there any sound that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so thank you for having me before I say anything else. But um, thinking of sound, so I'm at home right now, or my parents' home in Brazil, and we live in a big city, downtown area. So I hear a lot of traffic. I hear some construction. I hear my neighbors because we're in a building and I can hear everything that goes on around me in other apartments. But I also hear a ton of birds. And there's one particular bird that we call it the bem here, which that's the sound when I come home and I'm in Brazil and I wake up that next morning and I hear that particular bird. That's when I feel like, oh, like I made it. I'm home. Because that just brings me, that's just the sound that I grew up listening to every single morning. So, in terms of how that relates to sustainability, really, I think I mean, of course, the traffic and the construction and the city sounds, I think you can relate that to conversations about environmental sustainability pretty easily, but on a different level, a more personal level. I feel like I can talk about sustainability, like sustaining I come here to recharge. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So
Mm-hmm.
sustaining my health, sustaining my will to work, sustaining my research interests, even because this is where I began to be interested in telling environmental stories and talking about the environment. And when I come back here and I hear these birds and I look outside and I see these particular trees or I feel the humidity around me, that's kind of like, yeah, this is why you do this. Like, this is why you're interested in doing what you do. So that's a different way of thinking about sustainability, I think. But yeah.
I love that. And I love to learn more in this conversation about where you're from and how you grew up, inspired your research and your doing. But before we get there, can you just briefly let us know who you are, where you are, if you're not in Brazil, and what you're doing in your kind of normal, not recharging mode?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Beatrice. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Oregon right now. I'm born and raised in Brazil in the city called Curitiba, which is in southern Brazil. And I did my undergrad in journalism, so I'm still very interested in environmental journalism specifically, but I got into this program in communication and media studies at the U of O because there's a lot of great science communication work being done there right now. So I've gone into that. I'm interested in SciComm, environmental comm. Environmental education is something that I'm pretty passionate about as well. And the education of communicators and of journalists is something that I hold pretty near and dear to my heart because I'm not too far away from being a journalism undergrad, really. I went straight out of my undergrad into a master's, into a PhD. Um, and learning how to tell these environmental stories and these sustainability stories is something that I always wanted so bad. But at least at the time that I was doing my undergrad, it didn't really feel like that much of a career path, at least here in the context that I was in. Which I think today that's changed, thankfully. I think there's more and more, the demand for that kind of journalist or communicator is more explicit now. and students are searching that more, but um, coming up with these culturally relevant and situated ways to teach people here, teach future and current communicators how to tell these environmental stories is something that I'm really interested in. I've watched several other Sounds Like Sustainability episodes, and I'm not as near as like far into my career as some of your other guests. So I don't have the longest list of accomplishments, but that's the stuff that I'm interested in.
No, and this is, thank you so much for introducing you in the way you did. And I think it's not always about this kind of long list of yeah, experiences and things that people carry around or share. But what I'm really curious about is a couple of things that you mentioned, and this is definitely environmental education, and why you feel there is a new demand for it, or a new demand for telling stories in a very specific way, which sits quite nicely at the overlaps to science communication and some really innovative, good thinking here. Looking specifically at another science communication expert who's in the room today as well. But I just want to kind of go back to something that you said, which is potentially a bit more conceptual. Let's start with that. So you said they are communicators, and you feel that different communicators are now searching for better ways to tell the story about the environment. If you say communicator, is it predominantly journalists, or are there any other communicator roles that you can think of?
Absolutely. I usually, my default is kind of to think in terms of journalism. That's
Mhm,
just because where I came from,
mhm,
my background is, but I don't mean it like that at all, especially because um, I don't love the boxes.
mhm,
Here, you don't have to have a journalism degree or any kind of advertising, PR, or any kind of degree to tell an environmental story and to practice environmental communication.
mhm,
So when I use the term communicators or communication, I use it to try to be as broad about it as possible because I want to be inclusive of all kinds of environmental or science communications that exist around us.
mhm,
I've spoken to journalists here or people that are working in news outlets and creating news stories that
mhm,
don't consider themselves journalists. And they have told me, like, I'm not, just to get things straight, I'm not a journalist because they don't have like a journalism degree. So,
mhm,
and I feel that I'm like, well, but you're doing the thing, right? And it's not just about the piece of paper. So I kind of go back and forth. Yeah, the title or the tag.
mhm,
So I kind of think about that a lot, and I just use that term to be as inclusive as possible. So, but yeah, and here in Brazil specifically, there's this we usually go like our majors in college, right? You can be a journalism student, an advertising student, or a PR student. That's usually what you see. But in the end, when people graduate, it kind of just gets all pretty mixed up. I don't think
mhm,
most people stay in their lanes in that sense of doing exactly what your degree
mhm.
says, you know? So yeah, I think it's pretty broad.
Cool. It's interesting because I do have this discussion a lot with my students from, again, different programs. And because my feeling is that there is a bit of a gap in terms of more thinking and more theoretical thinking around who are those communicators out there. And of course, most of us have like one specific communicator role in their head, especially when they teach. But my feeling is there are so many new emerging communicator roles within organizations and, of course, beyond. So I think there is a lot of potential to think, okay, who are the people who tell those environmental stories or responsibility stories or whatever it is? So thanks for kind of bringing the Brazilian perspective into that and how much this is connected to then kind of you study this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you end up working in PR or journalism, because as we know, a lot of journalism students then work in PR because they're actually really good writers, which they need in PR. So, So, and like if you think about different universities you experienced and kind of different programs at different places, the education that you get, do you feel like what role does the environment, our human nature relationship, and environmental and also social responsibility plays in those programs? Is this something that is now taught at the forefront, or is it more kind of happening here or there, or is it really dependent on the teacher and the courses you take?
I would say I'm a very big, like, it depends person for all of my answers, which I
Mhm.
realize is so annoying, but but I do think it depends on the teacher. I mean, in
Yeah.
my experience going, I've been in several universities in my life. In Brazil, I did, my undergrad was a double degree program. So I studied a year out of my 4 years of undergrad. I was in Spain, and then I came
Mm.
back and then I went to the States for graduate school and different universities in different states. So it's really, I guess there's a difference when I think about place a lot, and the role that place plays in the way that we do our work. And I'm super interested right now in this concept of place attachment and how that um, informs both the production and the consumption of news, which is something that I'm pretty interested in. And I definitely think it's different for you to learn and learn how to write about a place or create content about a place or tell the stories of a place if you are from that place or if you're an international student like I've been for so much of my life. And of course, there are some teachers, some professors that will be a little more mindful of that and kind of um, embrace that or embrace the different kind of perspective you as an outsider will bring. Or on the other hand, right, if you're here, like help you draw from your own experiences and put that into your work in the place that you're actually from.
Mhm.
But I do think it varies. I've had varied experiences. I mean, as an international student, I can talk about this a lot. Like, as an international student, it's so different when we have classes or we're mentored by other faculty that are also international or have also had international experiences. It's
Mhm.
just different. There's a whole layer of things there that, in terms
Mm.
of that education, like
Yeah.
process and exchange, that is added when you've also had that kind of experience.
Hmm. It's great that you're saying that, because this is something that brings us maybe a bit closer to the sustainability stuff, because that would be
Mhm.
maybe a provocative question. Can sustainability and sustainability related issues, can they actually be taught um, without this place-based perspective or connection to place?
Yeah, I think so. There's this, I was doing some reading before this
Hmm.
to prepare, and I found the work of this pretty famous Brazilian philosopher called Leonardo Boff, and he has tried to define sustainability in his work. And in one of his texts, one of the books that I looked at, he talks about sustainability as a matter of life and death, and that's how he defines it. And at first, I was like, that seems pretty extreme. Like, what exactly do you
Hmm.
mean? But I very quickly found myself agreeing with him. If you strip back everything and just
Hmm.
thinking about what is sustainability, what is like to sustain something or for something to be sustained, if the very bare bones definition of it, then I kind of saw how it made sense, at least in my head, in the sense of like something that is sustainable, something that has that balance is something that will go on. It's something that will live and maybe not necessarily thrive, but it's something that is long term, right? You can expect it to continue. And something, a situation that is not sustainable, it's just not, it can just can't go on, it'll die. So in that sense of a matter of life and death, I got it in this very like stripped back way of thinking about sustainability. And then of course, if you add on the environmental sustainability aspect of it all, then in my head it already brings that, like, it's a very loaded term, it's so complex, it means very different things to different people. I still try to strip it down, and I think there's this underlying theme of care in
Mhm.
sustainability.
Mhm.
But then I also very quickly think of, well, different people care about different things. So
Mhm.
sustainability, even with that unifying ethic of care underneath, still might not mean the same thing to people because you might care about completely different things. So I think that when you really break it down and you strip it as much as possible to this very like basic definition, then that's something that I guess could be taught or could be communicated in a more like in the vacuum, right? Not super tied to place or context. But when you start getting into what that actually means where we are, then it might be harder to do that. Like I always try to, in all of my work, I've tried to bring a cultural studies perspective to my questions and look at environmental journalism or education or news or like nonprofit communication, all of that. But really putting context and place and history and all of those things, culture broadly, in the center of the questions. And coming from this place where I come from, like academically, it's hard for me to say like, yeah, sure, we can teach whatever acontextually or not
Mhm.
really thinking about place and roots and all of that.
Yeah. Do you think that the reality of teaching environmental issues, sustainability, social responsibility, the reality of teaching that in the United States, for example, or the universities that you experienced, is this the reality that it's taught that way? Because my perspective from, let's say, the environments that I know, which is more Australian than Europe, is that it's still taught on a very abstract level, that is taught as kind of normative frameworks on the one hand, and then of course kind of policies, regulations that impact organizations, and then they are the ones that develop certain strategies, so it kind of translated down. But you still kind of people pull up those triple bottom lines and donut models and policies and definitions from Brundtland and I don't know what. So my feeling is that in kind of it's still this thinking about how can we create this common sense, how can we all stick to this one definition of the 17 SDGs, kind of that hinders to actually make sense of those local contexts, very local interpretations, very, very different perspectives on that.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I've been thinking about this in preparation for this, and I think, and this is completely anecdotal, like
Hmm.
I have no
Fair
have
enough. This is
no
why we're
evidence
doing
to
this.
back this up. This is just my own observation of my very like my little bubbles that I'm in.
Mhm.
I think I hear the word sustainability and the concept sustainability much more when I'm here in Brazil than
Okay.
in the US. Um,
Really?
really.
Okay. Well, where
I've
and what? Cool.
I don't know how to explain it. I don't know exactly what's behind this. I don't even know if this is true or it's just something that, just something of chance that I've experienced this. But I've in Oregon, right, at the U of O, we have a science communication minor. We have several courses that students can take about science comm, about environmental comm, about storytelling of all of these topics. And they're fantastic, and none of them have sustainability in the title or in the I don't know about the class. I've never taken them because
Yeah.
they're for undergrads, but I'm sure it comes up. But it's not like when I think of the buzzwords that I hear the
Mhm.
most around campus and when I see people working on sustainability is not the main thing that comes up. We
What is
talk
it then?
I guess, environmental issues, extreme weather, like it's more topical, I would say, like, or just climate communication or strategic environmental comm. Maybe that's kind of where
Mhm.
it could go more to that side. Again, I'm more hanging out with the journalism people, so maybe that's
Yeah.
can account for a little bit of this. Also just stuff like resilience, environmental resilience, and stuff that we around that. So I don't know. Here, I feel like I hear more of that just observing stuff in the news and just what comes out, what kind of conversations people are having, because I'm not in a university space here, right? So I can't really speak on that. But in terms of policy and news coverage of policy and events and
Mhm.
environmental education, like campaigns that I see around
Mhm.
my city here, Curitiba has this kind of reputation, I would say, worldwide, even depending on your field, for being a smart city or a green city, or we're kind of known for our urban planning. So there's a lot of conversation here about how sustainable the city is and how
Mhm.
sustainable our systems are and all of
Cool.
that. So that's a word that I hear much more when I'm home than when I'm at school.
Mm. Cool. Interesting. So kind of leading this a bit back to the education aspects, because I'm personally thinking about this quite a bit. Like how, or from your perspective, does environmental journalism, environmental communication, and also sustainability communication, does this need to be taught in a different way? And if so, why?
I think we could all benefit from this more local
Mm-hmm.
way of thinking about this. I think, and this is not, I'm not saying anything too surprising or dramatic here. I think like when we think about environmental comm initiatives generally, that people with the best of intentions, were trying to do, like when you think about the polar bear on the ice cap kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we know how that kind of stuff can backfire pretty easily and kind of tell people that this is a problem that's so far away. And I think that going back to that demand thing that we talked about earlier, I think I've been noticing that more because the problems aren't far away anymore. Like in the past 5 years, we were just talking about this right before we started recording. It's summer here. It's supposed to be summer, and it's not. It's cold. I'm sleeping with like two blankets, and everything's weird. And the winters aren't as cold anymore, and in the summers, like there are no seasons. We never know what we're gonna get when we come home. So we've been dealing here in this region with horrible flooding and storms and stuff that, of course, we've always had like big rains. This is tropical,
Mm-hmm.
but it's easily now like people can see that it's going beyond what was normal. So that, I think, because of that, because of people's personal experience with environmental issues around them, we are way past the polar bear and ice cap kind of story, right? People want to write, and I'm just thinking about a journalism
Yeah.
student here. You want to write about the stuff that's going on around you and that's affecting your community. And even if you are writing about something that's going on far away, how can you bring that? Like, why would that be relevant to your audience, for your local audience? How can you make that story applicable or just matter to people here? Because how
Mm-hmm.
are you going to even care about something that's going on so far away when your home is completely flooded, right? So I think that I keep just what's the word I'm looking for? I just keep gravitating more and more towards this localized way of teaching and thinking and writing about environmental stories generally, because there's just no escaping them anymore, really. Because
Yeah.
if you were all here in with everything fine and we look
Mm-hmm.
around in rose-colored lenses and
Mm-hmm.
nature is thriving and the weather is perfect, then maybe we can have the capacity to think about, something that's going on far away from us.
Mm.
When you just cannot escape it, when it's just in your life all the time, and of course, this affects people in very different ways, right? It affects me right here in my building. This apartment on the 8th floor hasn't flooded. And for a lot of people, I think a lot of people that we don't talk about, that are not on the news, that are largely marginalized here, they're dealing with those impacts the most. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's just that sense of just commitment to your community. If these things are happening right next to you, that's the stuff that you should be covering.
And to also bring it back to like the starting point of our discussions, those communicators. Like as much as we know we need journalists, and we need really good journalists, like local journalists, as the one who really care and take care in their storytelling and through their storytelling. What other communicators might be more important in the future? Like who else is out there that we need in kind of complementing journalism or journalists as like one key communicator for sure?
Well, we can't, as journalists, we can't do anything. Not
Mm.
anything, but it's really
Mm.
hard to do things by yourself, right? Like we need
Mhm,
sources.
mhm,
We don't
mhm,
write stories that just come out of our own minds. We talk,
mhm,
we interview people, we talk to people. So having, like, for example, I think the very basic model of a story here when you're writing an environmental news piece or something, you're going to talk
mhm,
to, let's say there was a flood, right? You're going to talk to official sources, so government or like disaster response people, firefighters, or whatever it is
mhm,
in your area. You're going to want to talk to experts, scientists, and try to explain the whys and the hows of this is happening. You're going to want
mm,
to talk to community members that were affected, and then also have a ton of knowledge about their environments, and they have a lot of insight on why is this happening to them, right? More than I think a lot of mainstream media outlets give people credit for. So you're also going to talk to, um, um, I'm thinking about a specific context here. So in our state, in the state that I am right now, in the coastal area of it, we have one of the largest ports in Brazil, or in Latin
mhm,
America, really,
mhm,
in Paranagua, a town called Paranagua. And there you have all of these corporations that are located there in that port area because they bring their supplies in and everything, and a lot of importing, exporting going on. All of those companies, they are obligated to create and carry out environmental, like pro-environmental actions or activities, kind of to, you know, the port has a big environmental cost, obviously, to the area, so they kind of have to make that up a little bit. So they do that, and a lot of the environmental journalism that goes on in that area happens a lot in contact with these corporations because they are, let's do a beach cleanup. Let's do like a reforestation activity there or whatever. So then you have the PR people that work in these companies that are in touch with
mhm,
journalists all the time.
mhm,
So I think in terms of other communication professionals that we need in this
mhm,
cycle, you need everybody. You need, when
mhm,
you're telling an environmental story, you will have to talk to the communications person in government. You're going to have to talk to the communications person in a university when you're trying to get in touch with that faculty member that doesn't answer your emails. You're going to have
mhm,
to get in touch with the comms person in that massive company that is being, I don't know, is in the middle of some kind of lawsuit because they are doing some kind of environmental infraction, and you're going to have to be in touch with them as well. So if, and with the community too, so if everyone is a bit more, you know, really just trained, like prepared to interact with each other, I think these processes would flow much better. So in Oregon, we just did this study where we interviewed journalists, scientists, and public information officers about wildfires and how wildfires are, how all of these three groups kind of interact with each other when a wildfire happens, and for journalists to do wildfire coverage. And the idea there was to kind of understand expectations that they had within, for each other. And
mhm,
and it was just interesting because it's not, I guess, too surprising, but you know, journalists, scientists, with some scientists, generally most of them had positive experience with each other, but some scientists you would hear, well, journalists need to be better prepared. Journalists need to know more about the science. They come and they ask me questions, and
mhm,
I can just see that they haven't, you know, prepared as much as they should have, and blah blah blah. And then some journalists would say, well, I work on 6 stories a day and I don't have time to become a fire expert for that one story that I have. Like I start in the morning and I have to finish it in the afternoon. So it goes on the 6 o'clock news. And so I think that again, most of them had positive experiences with each other. I don't want to misrepresent
Yeah.
our findings here, but these tensions are very real. And I think a lot of it has to do with expectations and understanding what the other person does, the other group does. Like, what is the routine of a journalist and what exactly is behind that story that they need to put together for the 6 o'clock news? How much time do they have to work on that? And then the PR person in the company, like, what are the other responsibilities that they have and they're managing, and who are they answering to? So like understanding each other a little better, I think would be super important. And for that, I mean, we need really well trained communication professionals everywhere.
Yeah. That sounds a bit like a final statement already. Maybe one final question I have to ask. If you would say, because you have those insights and experiences in two very different contexts, or like more than two actually. But what would you say, like in terms of how this networking, this we need each other, this kind of complementary perspective on how environmental communication happens and environmental journalism should happen. So like, how are there any learnings from your local context or the Brazilian context that could be taken as an inspiration and translated to, for example, the US context or European context? What would you say are the big learnings, or maybe something where you could say, like, actually, guys, there's so much good stuff already happening, that we could, you know,
like you can apply other places, right?
Yes, and build on.
In Brazil, it's just when you talk about environmental journalism here specifically, I'm always in awe of the people that actually do it, because we have fantastic specialized news outlets out there, like environmental news outlets here in Brazil that do absolutely incredible work. And really it's so hard. It's so hard in so many ways. And especially I think the most extreme things that come to mind is that it's so dangerous to do environmental journalism here. It's one of the countries that just the violence against environmentalists and environmental journalists in Brazil is just way beyond anything that should be real or acceptable. And the fact that some people are still interested in pursuing this and they still do it and they go to the places and they put themselves at risk is something that in my travels and in my studying in other places, I haven't really seen that level of just, like nothing is gonna stop me kind of thing. And I think that that comes from a very deep, like a place of a very deep sense of care, really, because we know, and you can talk to like so many people here. It doesn't have to be an environmentally involved or activist kind of person, but we know just how precious what we have is, and not just to like in an internal level, but globally. I think more and more we've been that conscious has been growing, and because of that, I think that fuels some people's just energy and nothing will stop me kind of attitude to protect and to speak, to protect and to tell these stories. And something else on like a smaller, not as dramatic level, because of course this violence conversation is just horrendous, but the journalism that goes on in these non-specialized vehicles, or sorry, we say vehicles in Portuguese, and I find myself saying that in English a lot, and then
no, it's okay. No, I like the term though. So
yeah, we say news vehicles, and I get confused. But anyway, in these outlets, Brazil is a place where I saw this data in a like a symposium that I attended here a few months back, and there's this concept of news deserts, right? And we have a lot of those here, like a lot of towns. I think the figure was around like
Mm,
half of the cities, towns in Brazil don't have their own news outlet, like their local news outlet. And the ones that do have it, a lot of them are often just one, and they're owned by a politician or a corporation, like a business person, and controlled in that way.
mm,
So you still find, like I've seen news outlets here around me that are literally just one person, that the whole thing is one person. They are the reporter, they are the editor, they are the person that like does the online social media thing.
mhm,
And and these are people that are so inserted in their communities, and
mm,
they're telling the story kind of from the ground up. They're part of
mm,
the
mm,
community. They're not a journalist that came from outside and told that story and then
mm,
left. They're doing that because they're not making a lot of money, not by any means. They're not like, they're still putting themselves in those situations where they can be threatened, they can
yeah,
be, get in trouble, and still like a one person paper or a two-person paper or channel or whatever. We see those here. So I think those really like grassroots efforts that
mm,
people
mm.
have, that I observe here to communicate in that way, are just really inspiring. And I'm sure that I'm not saying that this is not something that doesn't happen in other places, but that's something that inspires me when I'm here.
Hmm. No, I love that. And I love this thinking about, you know, not just for journalists, being a bit more activist, being a bit more
Hmm.
radical, being a bit more
Hmm.
like not just, oh yeah, we care, but no, no, no,
Hmm.
we need more. We really need to
Hmm.
stand up for that.
Hmm.
So this spirit is something that you can see kind of growing. And I love that you say, okay, this is something that we can really then like it should be an inspiration also then for educating those people who might take over those roles and not just journalism, because really take this on for like all the other communicator roles that I educate students for, like strategic
Hmm.
communicators, campaigners,
Hmm.
people who want to work as a communication officer in an NGO, but also in a corporate. Because like, this, yeah, just to be a bit more, move out of comfort zones and make other
Yeah.
people to move out of these comfort zones. I think this is an element that we should increasingly implement in our teaching as well. So I really take this from there. Hmm.
Yeah, I just, so I can add something to that. I don't mean to in any way like the stuff that some journalists, environmental journalists, or just environmentalists generally here go through. It's not, I say that it's inspirational. It's
Mm.
inspirational, the just the fact that they keep going because they care
Yeah.
so much, and
Yeah.
or whatever motivation they have. But
Yeah.
I don't mean to make this like, I don't mean to romanticize this violence,
No, 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 no. I think
horrible
it,
thing in any way. Like I would never want to say, wow, like
yeah.
get out there and put yourselves in danger kind of
No,
thing. It's
no.
the reality of what you see here, and
Yeah.
you need to be prepared for that kind of thing if that's the
Yeah.
path that you want to go down.
Yeah.
And the fact that people are still doing it despite all that, all those
Mhm.
obstacles, I think is
Mhm.
an example of, you know, um,
Yeah.
just that, like I said, that nothing's going to stop me kind of attitude. This matters more, you know?
No, no, no. But and I think like I can see the trap of
Mm-hmm.
over romanticizing this and kind of creating this idea of like, oh, don't we all have to be
Mm-hmm.
innovators
Mm-hmm.
and pioneers and rebels and ta ta da.
Yeah.
But I really mean it that this deep notion of care is something that motivates you to give this kind of extra bit
Mm-hmm.
and not to let yourself get instrumentalized to do
Mm-hmm.
things. And so I, I take it as a bit of a call for researchers and of course for all the scholars and practitioners that listen to this podcast, that it's at least worth to think more about it, these radical elements, and kind of yeah, try how would this make sense in the context every one of us is in, because
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
translates very differently to the different contexts. So
Absolutely.
thank you for yeah, putting out this inspiration and this critical thinking here. I'm very grateful that we had this conversation. And so a big thank you for this round of conversation here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This was great. And I just, it's so great to have the opportunity to talk about these things and put these thoughts out there and share them with people. Research can be so isolating. So it's great to have conversations with real humans and yeah, just nerd out about that stuff. So thank you. Thank you for having me and for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.